Legends of Blood, Seeing Red, Chapter 2. Leopard hit the ground and rolled, attempting to break away from her unknown assailant, to no avail. Rather than immediately gaining the upper paw, as she would have hoped in her first real scuffle, she instead found herself pinned on the ground and looking up into the face of another wolf. Her position exposed her soft white underside to attack, though her legs were kept in place by the weight of her attacker. The wolf on top of her was a male, as given away by his scent, and he had a coat that was short and coarse, being made up of primarily shades of reddish-brown. He was considerably smaller than the wolves of the pack that she had originated from, and his snout was much more narrow. Light-colored markings were present on his chest and the sides of his face below his yellow eyes. He almost looked like a coyote, but he was too big to be one, and his scent was definitely that of a wolf.
"You're not Mud,"
said the stranger, his voice shifting to reflect the concern and then fear that flared in his eyes as his gaze locked with hers. He leapt away just before she could lunge forward in an attempt to grab hold of his throat. Her jaws snapped shut on empty air, and she quickly rolled over onto her stomach so that she could stand. She wasted no time with shaking herself off, instead immediately facing the place where she had last seen the wolf. All that she had caught was the tail end of him as he dashed behind one of the structures, and she was quick to give chase, unwilling to let him get away. She had waited so long to finally encounter another wolf. She had not dared let the opportunity slip by her because she had been unprepared. She crossed the overgrown gravel path, reaching the structure that he had disappeared around. From there, his brown furred form was visible fleeing away from the maker's things, running at full speed towards a distant tree line composed of more of the tall pines. She wouldn't let him get that far. She took off after him, feeling the familiar pounding of her paws against the warm ground. It had been too long since she had been involved in a good chase. She had almost forgotten what it was like, the thrill of running something down. Chasing hares hardly counted when compared to the sensations that were excited by bringing her a creature as large as herself to the ground. Her excitement was further fueled by what this wolf represented. An opportunity to get everything that she had ever wanted and pay for it all with blood. She passed another equally fresh scent marker, confirming that she was now within the territory that belonged to the strange wolf and his pack. She worried not where the other wolves were, however, for she knew that the stench of the blood would be carried on the wind and reach them once she had slain the first of their kin. And then they would inevitably come for her. She'd be prepared to do all that was necessary to forge a new pack in the place where an old one once stood. She could feel her strength gradually chipped away with every stride that brought her no closer to the fleeing canine. He appeared to be running at much the same speed as her, and he was getting nearer to the trees than she would have liked. Fearing that she would lose him once he reached the forest, she forced herself to go as fast as she possibly could, which wasn't much faster than the speed that she had already been traveling at. Still, it helped her make up some of the lost time. It looked as though she wasn't going to make it to the wolf before he reached the trees, although she quickly discovered that fate was hardly in her favor that day. The croaking cry of a black-feathered carrion bird caught her off guard, causing her to momentarily lose focus as she turned her gaze skyward to where the avian was flying overhead. That glance was all it took for her paw to catch on a rock that she hadn't previously noticed, tripping her. She felt herself lurch forward as she tripped, but wasn't able to stop it. Her momentum was turned down as she crashed face first into the unforgiving ground. She scrambled to get back on her paws, letting a small clump of dirt and grass fall from her jaws as she stood. She could taste the hint of her own blood, but she gave it no mind, instead scanning the area ahead of her for any sign of the wolf that she had been chasing. Just as she had expected, he was gone, as was the bird that had ruined her hunt. Frustrated both with herself and with her failure, she growled at nothing in particular, and viciously stamped her paw into the ground, because there was nothing else to take her anger out on. However, all was not lost. Not yet. Not yet. She could still catch up. She'd just have to be smart about it. She inhaled a deep breath of the warm air and closed her eyes, attempting to visualize what scents she could find. It was fading fast, being scattered by a soft breeze, but she could just barely pick up on the scents left by the stranger, a trail that would lead her right to him. She opened her eyes and allowed herself to smile before racing down the trail lined with other canine scattered scents. She dodged an ancient pine as she entered the unfamiliar forest, feeling the ground beneath her shift from compact dirt and grass into a covering of pine needles and loose leaf litter. The air was even more still within the trees than it was in the center of the valley, allowing her to better follow the scent. Tracking had been a vital skill to learn while in her own pack, one that had become even more valuable once she had left it. All animals could flee, but none could escape their own scent. On her journey towards becoming the predator that she now considered herself to be, she had learned that the scent was one of the few things that would never fail her. Eyes and ears could be tricked, but a scent would always lead her to where she needed to go. The wolf ahead of her was either hardly aware or not concerned with the scents that he left behind, as he appeared to make no attempt to conceal his trail. He traveled in a nearly straight line, only altering his path when it was necessary to avoid a tree or other obstacle. That was perfect for her. Not so much for him, though. She leapt over a moss-covered log and didn't slow. The scents were quickly becoming stronger the farther she went into the territory. She was gaining on him, getting even closer to the goal that would be completed as soon as her jaws were around his neck. Up ahead, she heard the soft flapping of small avian wings and caught a glimpse of sleek black feathers through the trees. It was the same carrion bird that had distracted her before. It must have been following the same wolf as her because it was flying in the direction that the scents were taking her. However, she didn't allow it to become her focus, not after the disaster that had nearly been brought about the prior time that she had seen the bird. If she got the opportunity to, she'd catch it and kill it, but that would only be after she had dealt with her canine prey. Overzealous as she was, she didn't notice the sounds of another wolf approaching her from behind until she caught their scent. It was a female wolf, just as unfamiliar as the individual that she was chasing. By the time that she had figured out that much, it was already too late for her to do anything but skid to a stop and turn towards the new wolf. The first look that she got of her opponent was that of an open set of snarling jaws, and she only barely managed to get out of the way before those jaws had a chance to bite down on her. Leopard managed to view the full body of the canine for a fraction of an instant before she had to jump to the side to avoid a second attack. The female wolf was much the same size as the one Leopard had been hunting, albeit slightly larger. Her fur was also a much lighter shade of muddy brown than the other individual, with lighter colors being centered on her legs and underbelly, as well as a patch on her forehead. Her face was contorted into a vicious snarl as she glared at Leopard. her green eyes staring straight forward. The wolf lunged forward, and Leopard dodged, only barely avoiding being knocked down. The stranger was less agile than her, despite her smaller size, Leopard quickly realized, backing up in preparation for her own attack. However, she had no time to go through with her intention before a new set of jaws had suddenly clamped down on her rear left leg. She yelped, twisting her body around to find that another female wolf had appeared from seemingly nowhere. One that greatly resembled the first, albeit with an even lighter coat that was more gray than red. Leopard knew what would follow. Unless she did something to stop it, the gray one would hold her in place, while the other female took a hold of her neck or ripped open her side. She had seen enough wolves in the pack meet the same end to know that she didn't want the same for herself. It appeared to her that this attack had been planned. The wolf that she had chased had led her into an ambush. They surely hadn't planned for someone like her, however. Both her thoughts and her body moved faster than the first female could launch an attack. Already, she had jerked her hindquarters forward, not in an attempt to get the jaws to release, but rather to pull the wolf to the ground. The motion caused the gray-coated stranger's teeth to be driven deeper into her flesh, but it worked as intended. The gray wolf hit the ground, and that was all it took for Leopard to twist her body and grab a hold of the canine's neck. She didn't kill her, though. There was no time for that. Not when she could see the red-brown female charging at her out of the corner of her eye. Instead, she simply bit down with enough strength to cause the wolf to let go of her leg, holding onto her throat even once the stranger had stopped biting. Calling on her innermost strength, she swung the smaller canine around to slam her into the approaching attacker. She didn't stick around long enough to see what happened next, instead taking off at full speed in a direction that she chose in a split instant. She wasn't running away, though, far from it. She just needed a moment to assess her situation. The teeth marks in her leg were deep, but not deep enough to cause her any worry. If she could run, then she could fight. That was all that mattered. However, she needed an advantage, something that could give her time to dispatch one wolf and focus on another. Such an opportunity soon presented itself in the form of a fallen pine tree, half rotted and overgrown with brown mushrooms and opportunistic vines. She could hear the sounds of the female wolves behind her, giving chase. Their slightly smaller bodies made them faster than her, just as she would have expected. Either that or her injury had slowed her down more than she thought. Regardless, she had enough time to enact her hasty plan. She leapt over the rotting log, immediately skidding to a stop and throwing herself into the damp wood. She then counted the moments, softly tapping her paw against the forest floor. In the first tap, she heard the wolves reach the log and stop. They must have smelled her blood. The second tap of her paw announced a muttered argument that ended with a growl. The third brought the larger of the two females, the one with the more reddish coat, and also Leopard's original opponent, hurling over atop of the log. The female must have been expecting to find Leopard licking her wounds, because it took her a moment to turn around to face the wounded canine after she had cleared the fallen tree. That was all it had taken for Leopard to notice a weakness, something that she hadn't seen before. Partially buried in the thick fluff of the stranger's neck and only visible from the rear was a faded band of black material with a small black box attached to it. It was a collar, Leopard realized, something that Elder had spoken of, but she had never seen for herself. Collars had been given to some wolves long ago by the makers, though their purpose had never been understood by Elder. This wolf must have gotten the collar from somewhere else, rather than directly from a maker, though because it was much too big for her, with much of it hanging just beneath her neck. The reddish canine spun around with an expectant grin on her face, an expression that immediately soured as she saw Leopard was nearly upon her. The stranger tried to snarl and snap at Leopard, but she was unprepared. She had underestimated her opponent. Leopard ducked beneath the haphazard attacks of the other wolf, centering her eyes on the extra material of the overly large collar. She grabbed a hold of the band in her teeth and jerked her head, pulling the snarling female to one side, then violently pulling her to the other. She then threw her whole body weight into forcing the canine to the ground, dragging her by the collar. As soon as her opponent was down, Leopard put her front paws on the wolf's side to prevent her from getting back up. She felt the individual beneath her take a few weak swipes at her underbelly, but the red female couldn't reach. With collar still held tightly in her jaws, Leopard looked down at the green-eyed wolf and jerked her head for a final time. Due to the angle at which she pulled and the fact that the wolf's pinned body couldn't move along with her head, this pull was followed by a wet crack within the collared individual's neck. Instantly, the fallen wolf's form fell limp, and the life left in her green eyes. Leopard let go of the collar and stepped away from the dead wolf. She had made her first kill, and she hadn't needed to spill a drop of blood to do it. But she wasn't finished. Not yet. She spun around to face the log behind her, anticipating an attack at any moment. What she found was far less threatening. The more gray female was standing atop of the fallen tree, staring down with wide eyes and jaw agape. Her ears were flat against her head in a clear display of fear. Before Leopard had a chance to take advantage of the stranger's terror, the female took off running in the opposite direction with tail tucked. She moved to chase after her, but felt a shooting pain run through her leg that had been bitten and decided against it. However, she wasn't staying in place because of her wounds. Definitely not. No, she wasn't following because she had simply chosen not to. Only a weak wolf would stop mid-hunt due to such a minor injury, and she wasn't a weak wolf. She refused to believe that she was a weak wolf. After what she had just done, she'd make sure that no one ever thought of her as weak again. She stared at the place where the female wolf had been for a moment longer before turning to assess the bite on her leg. The individual punctures had been flooded by her blood that now ran down her leg in thick crimson rivets, staining flesh and fur. Had the wolf's teeth gone much deeper, they would have scraped bone, but as it was, it wouldn't be much of a concern. She'd live. The low croak of a carrion bird broke her from her thoughts and drew her attention back to the body of the wolf that she had killed. There, just beyond the fallen canine, stood the male wolf that she had first seen while exploring the Maker's place.